The first question that we really want to address is the bench press a mandatory or a core lift for everyone? Now, we kind of addressed this question with the back squat as well, and the answer is kind of the same in that unless you're a competitive powerlifter, nobody has to bench press. And I know most of the males in the audience right now are going, what the fuck? But it's true. Not everyone has to bench press, and it's also not the optimal exercise for everyone either. But the reason that it is so common is that it is a pretty solid exercise in terms of increasing upper body pressing strength and, you know, the hypertrophy effect on the pressing muscles. It is a very good exercise when it's performed well. Like everything, if it's not performed well, then it has its downsides. Now, there are certain populations that maybe need to either avoid the bench press or ease themselves in to treating it as a core lift. Now, the first one that we're going to talk about there is those with poor posture. So anyone who's got a forward shoulder or a kyphotic style posture like this probably wants to ease themselves into bench pressing or horizontal pressing movements and then taking time to escalate up to the bench press purely because doing a lot of horizontal pressing is actually going to make that forward shoulder posture even worse, which is going to then make it more difficult for you to work on that and get them back to neutral over time. And B, if we're in a forward shoulder position and we're internally rotated, it's going to be very difficult for us to achieve optimal alignment in the bench press when we're performing it, which then can increase the injury risks. Things like shoulder impingement and things like that are at a greater risk if we're starting off in an internally rotated environment when we do bench press. Now, the other kind of population we want to take into account is individuals with really long wingspans. Now, when we're talking here, we are talking like basketball style builds, okay? So people with really long wingspan, basically human pterodactyls. The position that they end up in at the bottom of a bench press in terms of that degree of flex at the shoulder is going to be a position that's going to put a lot of strain on the shoulder joint. If you're one of those individuals, things like floor presses and board presses might be a better variation for you because that's going to limit the degree of shoulder flexion we get here and mean that we don't end up in too hazardous of a position for the shoulder at the bottom of the lift. Now, most of the things that we're going to talk about in relation to the bench press is still going to be effective for you, even if you're not necessarily using it in the context of a full range bench press. So the first thing that we're going to address is grip width and what is your optimal grip width. Now, a lot of the time certain things are thrown around like pinkies on the rings or the power rings of the bar and things like that. But in reality, you can't really use a measure like that because where your optimal grip is going to be dependent on a lot of variables. So first off, we've got your mobility and how big your arch and setup is going to be. We've got your arm length. And we've also got your rib cage size. The bigger your rib cage is, then the less range of motion you're going to get. And that's also going to change the touch point of the lift, which ultimately determines where your grip width should be. What we want to see is the widest grip that we can use that still allows us to achieve a vertical forearm at the bottom of the lift. And what this is going to do is give us the best blend of a reasonably shortened range of motion, not too much upper back stability requirements like we'd get with a super wide grip, but also good pec recruitment and generally spreading the load reasonably well. And also because then we've got a reference point in terms of a vertical forearm at the bottom, it becomes very easy for us to then track whether the lifter is doing it correctly, and then also track whether their positioning is off at the bottom, say they're over or under tucking their elbow, something like that. So what Naomi's going to demonstrate now is what that looks like for her personally. So she's going to set up with a grip that's just inside the power rings, and what we see is then when she comes in and she touches the bar on her chest, her forearms are pretty much vertical. And what we mean by that is the elbow joint is near as damn directly under the wrist joint. This is going to give her very good force transfer through the arm directly into the bar through her wrist. Perfect. Okay, so now that we know how to set up for the bench press, the next thing that we need to go over is actually how we unrack the bar. What we want to see from a good unrack is more like a straight arm pull down type maneuver where the chest is going to stay high, the shoulders are going to stay down and back, and the lats are going to pull horizontally on the bar and bring it out over to directly over the shoulder joint. Now this is why it's important to not set up too far from the pins if you're handing out to yourself, which is why we cued Naomi when she was setting up that realistically she should have her eye line directly under the bar. That usually puts you in a good position where you're not too far away from the pins, so it's difficult to unrack, but you're far enough away from the pins you don't have to worry about hitting the uprights then during your set. And that's also why it's important to have the J hooks set at a good height as well. What you don't want to have to do is have your elbows very bent and have them too low, and then you really do have to press it out of the rack. What we're looking for is when we set that bar height is we just want a very slight bend in the elbow here, so then when we straighten the elbow as we go to unrack, that elbow extension alone is enough for us to just clear the hook, and then we can use the lats to pull out this way, and then we don't get any loss of that thoracic arch that we just set up.